Before Boyz II Men, Boyz II Men, before Spike Lee, before John Singleton changed cinema forever, there was Cooley High. And in the next few minutes, you're going to discover 14 facts about this film that will completely change how you see it. We're talking real gang members recruited off the street, a soundtrack that cost almost nothing, and a story that never started as a screenplay, and one jaw-dropping bonus at the end that almost nobody talks about, involving one of the biggest roles in movie history. So speed up with me, because the list starts now. Number 1. The film came from a memory, not a pitch. Most movies start with a pitch meeting. Cooley High started with a writer sitting across from a stenographer. Eric Monte grew up in the Cabrini Green housing project on Chicago's near North Side and attended the real Edwin G. Cooley Vocational High School. When producer Steve Krantz encouraged him to turn his childhood into a screenplay, Monte didn't sit down at a typewriter. He couldn't. He wasn't a typist in the traditional sense. Instead, he met with director Michael Schultz every single day for a month, with a stenographer in the room. Their conversations were transcribed. Those transcriptions became the script. The character of Preach is Monte's direct stand-in, an aspiring writer from Cabrini Green who believes, against all odds, that he can make it in Hollywood. The film's closing title card tells audiences that Preach went to Hollywood and became a successful screenwriter. That's not a fictional flourish. That is what happened to Eric Monte. Monte was deeply intentional about what he was saying with this film. He described growing up in Cabrini Green as one of the best times of his life. He wrote Cooley High specifically to challenge the narrative that had calcified around housing projects. The assumption that being black and poor in Chicago meant growing up without joy, without friendship, without hope. Every frame of Cooley High is a direct argument against that assumption. Number 2. A 25-day shoot on $750,000. Here's a number that's almost hard to believe. $750,000. That was the entire budget. For a film shot across a living, breathing Chicago neighborhood, American International Pictures greenlit Cooley High with $750,000 and a 25-day shooting schedule for a film with a large ensemble cast, most of them non-professionals, spread across an entire urban geography. Production ran October through November 1974 in and around Cabrini Green itself, the same streets, the same elevated train lines, the same courtyard spaces where Monte had actually grown up. Navy Pier appears, the Gold Coast appears. The geography of the film is the geography of Monte's childhood. The real Cooley High was unavailable for filming, so interior school scenes were shot at Providence St. Mel's, several miles away. When the production couldn't afford a storyboard artist, Schultz found an art student from the neighborhood and hired them for the job. That film, shot in 25 days on $750,000, went on to gross $13 million. It became one of the 30 highest-grossing films of 1975. It was built entirely on neighborhood resources, neighborhood faces, and a schedule that would make most modern productions break out in a cold sweat. If you are enjoying this, take 2 seconds and leave a like. Subscribe if you want more videos like this. That support really motivates my work and helps a lot with bringing more content. Number 3. Pros. The rest were locals. The film had exactly 3 professional actors. Everyone else came from the community. Glenn Turman, Lawrence Hilton Jacobs, and Garrett Morris were the professionals. The rest of the cast, discovered throughout Chicago by casting director Gloria Schultz, who went looking for real people to populate a real story. Juanita McConnell, who plays Martha, the meat cleaver-wielding proprietor of the after-school hangout, was found in the neighborhood. Preach's mother was a real Cabrini Green resident. The community populated its own story. The studio was uneasy, but Gloria Schultz ran rehearsals almost every day with the non-professional cast members, working through scenes, running exercises, making sure everyone understood what they were trying to accomplish, not as performers, but as people. Director Schultz described putting the cast in a situation and telling them what they were trying to accomplish as people. For individuals already living in their element, that instruction barely needed translation. What the approach produced was a film inhabited by people so raw and immediate that the screen barely contains them. No acting class on earth teaches that kind of presence. You either live it or you don't. Number 4. The Motown soundtrack cost almost nothing. The Supremes, The Temptations, Martha and the Vandellas, Smokey Robinson, and the Miracles, Stevie Wonder, the Four Tops, every single one of them woven through the film's most significant scenes. In 1975, those rights cost barely a dent in the $750,000 budget. Director Michael Schultz has stated publicly that nobody cared about those songs back then. The catalog that had defined a generation of American popular music was available for a fraction of what it would cost today. Those same rights would run into the millions now, possibly tens of millions. The soundtrack also produced the film's one original composition, It's So Hard to Say Goodbye to Yesterday, written by Freddie Perrin and Christine Yerian, and performed by G.C. Cameron. Boyz II Men later covered that song on their debut album. A track written for a $750,000 independent film in 1975 reached an entirely new generation, kids who had never heard of Cooley High, through a record that bore the film's name. When the music finally came in during post-production, it didn't just accompany the images, it transformed them. But we'll get to that in a moment. Number 5. Garrett Morris was actually a teacher. Here's a detail that changes how you see every single scene he's in. At the time of filming, Garrett Morris was not between acting jobs. He was teaching children at PS 71 in Manhattan's East Village. The producers didn't want him. Their objection was that he looked too young for the teacher role to register as authoritative. Michael Schultz overruled them and pushed the casting through anyway. Morris made Cooley High and went directly to Saturday Night Live. He was in the original cast when the show premiered in October 1975, the same year Cooley High was released. The man who told Preach what he was capable of becoming was played by someone who was, at that exact moment in his life, simultaneously a real teacher and one of the most significant new voices in American comedy. That layering of reality and fiction is almost impossible to manufacture. It just happened, and it gives every scene Morris is in a particular weight that you can't quite name until you know the full story. Number 6. 2 actual gang members played the villains. The characters Stone and Robert, the 2 figures whose decisions set the film's tragic ending in motion, were not written as abstract villains. They were written as specific, recognizable people. The casting reflected that. Schultz wanted authentic gang members for the roles. He reached out to the Chicago Police Department for leads. Officers pointed him toward 2 petty thieves who ran together, Sherman Smith and Norman Gibson. Schultz went looking for them. Smith has described what happened. He and Gibson were simply walking down the street when Schultz pulled up in a limousine and asked them to read for the parts. Both men used their real names in the film. That decision alone tells you something about what Schultz was after. He wasn't asking them to perform authenticity. He was letting them be themselves inside the story. The specificity of their presence, the particular texture of how they move through the film's final act, gives the ending a weight that a conventionally cast production almost certainly could not have achieved. When the consequences arrive, they feel inevitable because they come from people who understand those streets in a way no casting call could ever reproduce. Number 7. Robert Townsend's entire screen debut is 30 seconds before Hollywood Shuffle, before the 5 Heartbeats. Before Robert Townsend became one of the most important independent black filmmakers of his generation. He was a teenager from Chicago playing basketball in a scene that lasts about 30 seconds. Townsend's screen debut in Cooley High is a walk-on. He is barely visible. He has 1 line. The production was shooting in and around Cabrini Green with local talent filling out the background, and Townsend was among the neighborhood faces pulled into the frame. What makes the detail significant isn't the size of the appearance, it's the trajectory it represents. Townsend grew up watching the production happen around him, saw what Schultz built with neighborhood resources and non-professional actors, and carried something from that experience into his own filmmaking career more than a decade later. Hollywood Shuffle, the 1987 independent film Townsend partly financed on credit cards, shares a creative DNA with Cooley High. Both were made outside the studio system, with limited resources and maximum authenticity. Townsend hosted the 2019 Academy tribute to Cooley High. The kid with 1 line came back as the man running the room. Number 8. The real Cooley High was demolished. The Edwin G. Cooley Vocational High School was a real institution. It stood on Chicago's near North Side and served students from the Cabrini Green housing project for decades. Eric Monte attended it. The film is named after it. It closed in 1979 and was subsequently demolished. The production couldn't even film inside it. Interior school scenes were shot at Providence St. Mel's, several miles away because the real building was unavailable during the 1974 shoot. The school that gave the film its name and its identity was absent from the film itself. What remains of Cooley High, the institution, is what Monte put into the screenplay. The hallways, the classrooms, the teachers, the students, the particular texture of that specific place in that specific era. All of it preserved in a film shot miles away using a substitute building. In 2021, the Library of Congress selected Cooley High for preservation in the National Film Registry as a work of cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. The school that inspired it had been rubble for more than 40 years by then. Before we keep going, subscribe if you haven't yet. Drop a comment telling me which movie or show you want me to cover next with strange behind-the-scenes facts. I read every single one. Number 9. The leads thought they'd made a bad film when Glynn Turman and Lawrence Hilton Jacobs first watched Cooley High. It was a rough cut. No color timing. No music. Their reaction was not encouraging. Hilton Jacobs has described it directly. They looked at what was on screen and thought it was not a good movie. His exact framing? Well, okay, another job. Big deal. 2 actors who had given everything they had on location in Chicago in the cold of November watched the rough assembly and felt nothing special. 3 months later, they saw a different version. The film had been color timed. The Motown soundtrack had been added. They were completely stunned. Turman has described watching the scene where Preach and Brenda walk past the railroad tracks with the Temptations' My Girl playing, and said it was like nothing he had experienced. The music didn't just accompany the images, it transformed them. What had looked like another job became something else entirely. The rough cut that produced indifference became the film that would be selected for the National Film Registry 50 years later. Sometimes the music is the difference between a film and a masterpiece. Number 10. ABC gutted the story to make What's Happening. ABC planned a direct television adaptation of Cooley High. The pilot was made. Then the network panicked. Test audiences found the tone difficult. The film's combination of genuine warmth and genuine tragedy didn't translate easily to the format and expectations of a network sitcom. Fred Silverman, the head of ABC at the time, told producers to start over. New characters, new title, nothing that would connect audiences to Monte's film. The serious core of Cooley High had to be stripped out entirely. The result was What's Happening, which aired from 1976 to 1979. The show retained a writing credit acknowledging its origins, but shared almost no tonal DNA with the film that spawned it. Where Cooley High ended with death and grief and irreversible consequence, What's Happening was a broad studio comedy built around a character named Rerun. The film that critics called one of the most vital and authentic portraits of Black youth ever put on screen became the source material for a network sitcom that Monte himself did not recognize as his own work. Hollywood took his story, sanded off everything that made it true, and sold it back to audiences as something comfortable. That's a story as old as the industry itself. Number 11. Welcome Back. Cotter came immediately after Lawrence Hilton Jacobs went from Cooley High to one of the most watched sitcoms on American television in almost no time at all. Shortly after completing the film, he was cast as Freddie Boom Boom Washington on Welcome Back, Kotter, alongside John Travolta. The transition was immediate. He went from playing in an independent film shot on location in a Chicago housing project to a major ABC sitcom with a live studio audience. The 2 roles could not have been more different in tone, scale, or circumstance. Cochise is a fully realized human being navigating genuine consequences in a world that feels entirely real. Boom Boom Washington is a broad comic character built around catchphrases and audience laughter. That Hilton Jacobs could move between those registers speaks to everything Cooley High demonstrated about him as a performer. Welcome Back. Cotter made him famous across America. Cooley High showed what he was actually capable of. Audiences who only knew him from Thursday night ABC got one version of Lawrence Hilton Jacobs. Audiences who had seen Cooley High understood there was another version entirely, and the gap between the two is a story about what television did and didn't know how to use. Number 12. Spike Lee and Singleton both named it as an influence. In the 40th anniversary retrospective, NPR described Cooley High as a touchstone for filmmakers like John Singleton and Spike Lee. That description is not hyperbole. The influence is traceable and specific. Singleton's 1991 film Boys and the Hood is a direct descendant. Both films follow young men in urban housing projects in the weeks before everything changes. Both build their first acts on joy, friendship, and ease. Both end with a death that recontextualizes everything that came before. The structure is the same. The emotional logic is the same. Singleton watched Cooley High and understood something essential about how to tell that story, and then told it again for a new generation and a new city. Spike Lee included Cooley High on his essential films list for aspiring filmmakers. That list is curated. Lee doesn't add films out of courtesy. The placement of Cooley High alongside the works he considers foundational is its own form of critical argument. In 2021, the Library of Congress made the argument official. Cooley High was selected for the National Film Registry as a work of cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. The independent film shot in roughly 6 weeks on a housing project budget now sits in permanent national preservation alongside the most significant works in American cinema history. Number 13. Eric Monte also co-created Good Times and Walked Away. The man who wrote Cooley High had the year before co-created one of the most significant black sitcoms in television history, and then he quit. Good Times, also set in a Chicago housing project, also centered on a black family navigating life with dignity and humor, premiered in 1974 as part of Norman Lear's CBS lineup. Monte co-created the show. He also walked after the first season. The experience was deeply unhappy. Monte was a writer whose vision was specific and personal, and whose relationship with the television industry was fundamentally uneasy. He had quit school early and hitchhiked to Hollywood to pursue writing. He built Good Times from his own experience. When the show moved in directions he didn't control, he left. He was already writing Cooley High during the period when Good Times was in production. The film that came out of those sessions with Schultz and the stenographer was, in some ways, the version of the story Monte could tell entirely on his own terms, without a network, without a committee, without anyone softening the edges. Good Times ran for 6 seasons. Cooley High is in the Library of Congress. Monte's name is on both. Quick reminder to subscribe if you are enjoying these revelations. And tell me in the comments, do you know any strange fact about this movie that I didn't mention? Let's build the list together. Number 14, Boyz II Men named their debut album after the film Cooley High Harmony. The 1991 debut album from Boyz II Men takes its name directly from the film. The group had grown up with Cooley High as a touchstone. The title was a deliberate act of homage. The album included a cover of It's So Hard to Say Goodbye to Yesterday, the film's original song written by Freddie Perren and Christine Yerian, and originally performed by G.C. Cameron for the 1975 soundtrack. The Boyz II Men version was recorded a cappella. It became one of the most celebrated recordings of their career, a slow, layered, harmonically precise piece of R&B that introduced the song to an audience that had never heard of the film it came from. Cooley High Harmony sold over 9 million copies in the United States. It produced End of the Road, which spent 13 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, a record at the time. The debut album, named after a $750,000 independent film from 1975, became one of the best-selling R&B records in American history. An entire generation learned the name Cooley High from a Boyz II Men album before they ever saw the movie. That is one of the more unusual forms of cultural transmission in recent memory, a film outliving its own obscurity through the music of people who loved it, almost at the end. And the best is still coming. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this video is reaching. Bonus: Glynn Turman was shortlisted for Han Solo. And here it is, the fact that almost nobody talks about, the one that changes the entire scale of this story. Cooley High made Glynn Turman visible in a way his prior work hadn't. George Lucas saw his performance and was interested enough to place him on the shortlist for Han Solo in Star Wars. The Han Solo audition process is well documented as one of the more unconventional casting searches in Hollywood history. Harrison Ford famously read lines with other actors while doing carpentry work at the studio and was cast almost by accident. What is far less widely known is that Lucas had seriously considered reaching beyond the established Hollywood talent pool. Turman was on the list. Lucas ultimately backed away from the casting choice. Contemporary accounts suggest it was considered controversial at the time. Harrison Ford was cast. Star Wars became the highest-grossing film in history at that moment. Han Solo became one of the most iconic characters in the history of popular cinema. Turman went on to build a remarkable career of his own. The Wire, Gremlins, Super 8, A Different World. He had made his Broadway debut at age 12, opposite Sidney Poitier in A Raisin in the Sun. He did not need Han Solo, but for one brief window, after a $750,000 independent film shot in 6 weeks in a Chicago housing project, the part was within reach. And the reason it was within reach at all is because Eric Monte sat across from a stenographer and told the story of his childhood in Cabrini Green. And those were 14 strange facts about Cooley High. This is a film that cost $750,000, ran 6 weeks, and ended up in the Library of Congress. Eric Monte poured his childhood into it. Michael Schultz shot it in the cold of a Chicago November. 2 real gang members played themselves. And somewhere in the edit bay, the Motown music came in and changed everything. Cooley High matters more than most people realize, not because it's a period piece, but because it's a blueprint for how to tell a story with nothing but the truth and the people who lived it. If you made it this far, leave a like, subscribe, and comment which fact surprised you the most. And don't forget to suggest another movie that deserves a list of strange facts. See you in the next video.